Okay, today we're going to be replacing a hub and wheel bearing assembly on a 98 Buick Century. So we're going to first take that, loosen the nut. And another way of doing it, if you forget and you race your car before loosening this nut, you can have also, you have an assistant step on the brake. That's another way of making it easy on you to be able to loosen it. And there's a third way also that I know of doing it. Once you take the tire off, you can place a large screwdriver or a pry bar in between the fins of the rotor, of the brake rotor, and that'll also keep it from rotating and help you loosen it. So you'll be using your 15 millimeter socket for that, with a 1 or 2 short extension or a medium extension. And I always use for this job, this is a heavy duty job, so I use the 1/2-inch drive sockets. You may get away with a 3/8 inch drive socket set, but you'll probably end up breaking them and then having to use a 1/2 inch anyway. So don't say I didn't warn you. I always use a 1/2 inch drive, and also I like to use 6-point sockets. I don't like to use the 12 points. And remember, these are the steering knuckle to caliper mounting bracket bolts, not the caliper sliding bolts, which are the ones here in the front. They're the ones in the back, if you have 2 bolts. Some people remove these 2 bolts and then remove the other 2, but there's no real reason to do that when you can just remove the entire assembly and just have to deal with only 2 bolts. To take off our rotor, and let's make sure that you keep it clean, and don't put grease on the rotor or on the pads. For this next step, we have turned the wheel all the way to the left, and to give us easier access to the bolt. And this is one of the bolts here. This is probably the easiest one to get at. And also the one on the other side, they're in a triangle pattern, so the other one is also not so hard to get to. What you would do on the other side, you just turn the wheel all the way to the right to get to the bolt at the bottom, just like this one on the other side. Now the hardest one to get is this bolt here. It's up here, and I'll try to get you a view of it. And there it is in there. That's the one. And that bolt is the hardest one to get to. But not impossible. You can get to it if you have the right tools and you follow the next steps. What you want to use a good quality socket, 13 millimeter 1/2 inch drive socket with a medium extension or 2 small extensions, and a good breaker bar. So if you use, and they're also, the head of the bolt is not very deep, and at times the socket, it's kind of hard to get the socket onto the bolt completely straight because of the constant velocity joint being right here on the side of it. So you want to use a nice 1/2 inch drive, good quality socket, and also being a 6-point socket. I like using the 6-point sockets, because if you use a 12-point socket, you run the risk of stripping the head of the bolt, and then you're going to be in trouble. So we'll remove these bolts. And you want to use also a good breaker bar so you can put some torque into it. And this is the hardest one. And we'll finish off, turn the wheels all the way to the right so we can get to the other bolt. Okay, so we turned the car wheels all the way to the right so we can get access to our third bolt. And we'll proceed to do that. Take that out. Okay, so we have straightened the car wheels and to make it easier to take out the hub and wheel bearing assembly. And usually some of these hubs will be stuck to the axle. And what you want to do, you want to use a rubber mallet or a plastic dead blow mallet or a brass mallet. You don't want to use a metal hammer and hammer on the axle here. So, or you can also use a hammer, regular hammer, with a piece of wood. Also, what you want to do also is take off your, unhook your anti-lock brake connector. And take that clip off. Okay, and then we'll be ready to go. We'll just slide this baby out. And what you want to do, you want to lift our axle so we can get our anti-lock brake connector out. And with that, we are ready to install our new hub and wheel bearing assembly. And installation is the reverse of removal, starting with placing the ABS connector clip bracket in the correct position, and that will depend on the car. And this car is done here on this side, on the right side. And then after that, you want to thread the ABS connector wire. So you want to thread it through the steering knuckle. So you want to lift your axle a little to give you clearance. Okay, and once we have the new hub in place, you want to start the bolts. The specifications on this car call for new bolts and new hub nut as well. So all new bolts and a new. Okay, so we got our 3 bolts torqued down to 96 foot-pounds. And remember, this torque specs are for a 98 Buick Century. So that will vary depending on your car, and those specs usually come included with your new hub and wheel bearing assembly. And if they don't, it's a good idea to consult a good repair manual. Before we install our rotor, we want to make sure to do a really good job of cleaning it with some brake cleaner. Okay, so we finished tightening our bolts, and remember, these are the steering knuckle to caliper mounting bracket bolts, not the caliper sliding bolts, which are the ones here in the front. They're the ones in the back. If you remember when we removed the caliper, we took out the back bolts, the ones that actually mount the entire caliper assembly to the steering knuckle. So in this way, you save the extra steps of removing the other two bolts. And now we're ready to install our axle nut. And what we want to do, we want to start that by hand. And even if you have air tools, it's a good idea not to use an air tool, air ratchet, or air impact tool for this, because the impact can actually damage your new hub. The bearings inside your new hub. So what you want to do, you want to start that by hand with a ratchet, and then we're going to be torquing it down. So what you want to do you want to check your repair manual for your specific vehicle. Okay, and once we get it snug, what we want to do is we want to grab a large screwdriver or pry bar, and you can place it right in between the fins and the rotor, right through the caliper hole here in the back, and you jam it in there, and this will hold everything, so you can torque everything down to the correct torque. And another way of doing it, you can also have an assistant step on the brakes, and so you can achieve the same thing. Get our torque wrench, and we'll torque this down. Okay, so we got that axle nut torque down, and we can remove our screwdriver. Remember to install our ABS connector, and what we want to do, we want to put it on the clip here, clip it to the mounting bracket, and then we'll connect the ABS. And we want to do that before we install the wheel, otherwise it's going to be a little harder to do. And we're ready to torque down our lug nuts, and what we want to do, we want to start them up by hand. Torque on our lug nuts. We have our torque wrench set to 100 foot-pounds, such as it's called for a 98 Buick Century. And of course, you need to check the specs for the car that you're working on, because that might vary. And we want to make sure we go evenly in a star pattern. We'll go across. Across this way. better than new.